I can't wait for those campaign ads to start running again. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, former U.S. Senator Russ Feingold wants his old job back. A horrific train crash in Philadelphia leaves 8 dead and hundreds injured. The NFL suspends Patriots quarterback Tom Brady for a quarter of the season for Deflategate, and he's appealing. Scott Walker visits Israel. ABC News anchor George Stephanopoulos admits that he gave $75,000 to the Clinton Foundation without disclosing it to his bosses or viewers, and he won't be moderating any GOP presidential debates. But we start with a decision about a police shooting in Madison. No charges against the officer in the shooting of 19-year-old Tony Robinson. The decision was announced by Dane County District Attorney Ismail Ozan, who said that Officer Matt Kenney was acting in self-defense.
I conclude that this tragic and unfortunate death was the result of a lawful use of deadly police force, and that no charges should be brought against Officer Kenney in the death of Tony Robinson, Jr.
Now, that did not satisfy protesters who took up the usual chant of no justice, no peace. Joining me on our panel this morning, defense attorney Dan Adams, former state representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Linda Bruin, and the managing editor of RateWisconsin.com, Colin Roth. We'll start with you. Lynn, did Ozan make the right decision?
Yes, I think he did. And in order to back up his statements, there was over 1,100 pages of documents released. There were 26 DOJ agents and supervisors investigated it. I thought they did a very thorough and open investigation, and he made the right decision.
Okay, Michelle Litchens.
He made the right decision, but did you see how difficult it was for him to actually go through that press conference? He was sweating profusely. I have to say that's what it looks like when a liberal is squirming, because he had to go against what he wanted to do. He wanted to find fault with the police officer. There was no evidence to prove that.
I almost get the sense, though, that the volume of evidence and the fact that Ismail Ozan himself, biracial, identifies as black, that muted some of the reaction on the streets in Madison. Did you get that sense as well, Dan?
It did, and the protests seemed to ring a little hollow this time. Ozan's mother is African American. In fact, she was a 1960s civil rights advocate and activist. And I listened to his presentation. It was very, very persuasive. What the protesters need to do now is stop going by a case-by-case protest of these shootings and actually advocate for a public policy change, which is vest cameras on every single police officer.
Okay. Colin Roth.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ismail Ozan did the right decision, and I give him a lot of credit. I think that he was under a lot of pressure and a lot of scrutiny, and he did the right thing, even if he was squirming a little bit and sweating. I think he did the right thing. But one thing that kind of went understated throughout this was just another case of the tragic impact of drugs and how it can take a young man's life, whether it's black or white. This is a problem in our country, and it's something that we need to examine. I don't think Tony Robinson would be dead today without drugs.
I was very impressed, first of all, before we get to Ozan, I was very, very impressed with the thoroughness of this Department of Justice investigation. I mean, they talked to everybody, and you got a really clear picture of everything that was happening in Tony Robinson's life that day. This was not a close call. No. That was the thing. This was not a close call in terms of the judgment call. So Ozan did get it right. But once again, we see the danger of putting it in that narrative of white cop shoots unarmed black man. That is kind of that knee-jerk response, and the protesters continue to do it. You do need to see this on a case-by-case basis. And not only was Matt Kenney not charged criminally, I think when you read the report, you may disagree with me, I think that what you saw, there was an exemplary cop who thought that somebody was being strangled, could have waited a little while for somebody else, but went up that stairway at some risk to himself. So we're talking about a good cop, but I have to ask the question, is he ever going to be able to go back on the streets in the city of Madison? Are any of these cops that go through this, are they ever going to be able to function again?
It seems not in the Facebook age. I mean, there's a Facebook page that is attacking him personally and asking people to update the page about his whereabouts in the community. I mean, it's just awful.
Yeah, it's just really sad, especially because he was such a well-respected police officer in the community, and he did so much in the community, and people came to support him. So it's sad if he's not out there.
What do you think, Colin, about the suggestion? Because we hear a lot about the police cameras and whether that would have made a difference, and maybe it would in a case like this. Maybe it would have made a little bit of a difference, although I think the protesters, it didn't matter what evidence you presented. On the other hand, might there be unintended consequences if every single encounter of a police officer with an individual is taped? Doesn't that have implications for privacy? Doesn't it have implications for the willingness of people to interact with the police departments? I'm just not sold on the technological fix for all these problems.
Sure, and it's not a silver bullet fix, and just like all big public policy questions, there's give and take on it. I think on the merits, I think body cams is a good thing. I think it would protect the officers more in a lot of cases, as well as citizens' rights.
Okay, so what has your glass half full this week? What has your glass half empty? Let's go around the table. We'll start with Dan Adams.
Charlie, my glass is half full this week because Wisconsin Democrats look poised to win a statewide election with Russ Feingold's announcement that he's seeking a rematch against Senator Ron Johnson. Feingold has a huge 16-point lead in a recent poll. My glass is half empty because at age 62, Feingold is more back to the future than a breath of fresh air, and his unopposed primary points to the lack of young rising stars in the Democratic Party.
Michelle Litchens.
My glass is half full because Russ Feingold announced he is once again running against Senator Ron Johnson. Johnson beat Feingold by 5 points in that election 6 years ago. It's half empty because this could be the most expensive Senate campaign in the country in 2016.
Yeah, Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because the Baltimore Orioles, who rescheduled games after the riots a few weeks ago, are paying all of their employees for their lost work time. My glass is half empty because Wisconsin's Republican legislators are wasting everyone's time by adopting bills to further limit food stamp choices and start drug testing when both bills won't get federal approval.
Colin Roth.
My glass is half full because the persecution of Marquette University professor John McAdams is featured prominently in Kirsten Power's new book on the battle for free speech. It's half empty because Marquette has not given up their Kafkaesque inquisition of McAdams, and he remains barred from campus.
Well, my glass is half full because Madison police officer Matt Kinney was exonerated. It's half empty because I just said because this decision will never be enough for some anti-police agitators. So where does Matt Kinney go to get his reputation and his life back? Next on Sunday Insight, police interviews with suspects are missing after a computer system crash. How big of a deal is that? Back in January, the system that recorded Milwaukee police interviews suffered what the department itself called a catastrophic failure, potentially affecting criminal cases that relied on those tapes.
This was no secret. It was a narrow technological issue.
Well, late last week, Police Chief Ed Flynn said that only 7 cases were affected, but state legislators said they would hold a joint hearing to examine the breakdown. Flynn said he would refuse to attend and refuse to answer questions, calling it political reindeer games. We'll get to that in a moment. Dan Adams, how big a deal is this, the potential loss of hundreds, maybe even thousands of these police interviews?
We just don't know. The decision makers aren't really telling us.
Yeah.
Chief Flynn said only 7 cases have been adversely affected. Now, those could be cases that are actually charged and in the circuit courts right now, being delayed from going in front of a jury while who knows what happens to the witnesses in the case, the other evidence in the case. But there could be open investigations, cases that are somewhere in the investigative process that haven't been brought to the district attorney's office yet, and that could be, tens, if not hundreds.
Okay, so if it was a catastrophic failure and it did have this disruptive effect, why did we not hear about it in January, February, March, and April?
It's interesting. Judges knew about this.
Yeah.
As a member of the defense bar, I knew about it, but nobody ever told me. I just kind of learned about it through the grapevine and being in court. I'm surprised that Mayor Barrett did not receive a memo from his police chief on this.
Well, I mean, I've seen the memos that describe this in January to the entire police department, saying there's a catastrophic failure. We have lost all of the interviews before January 2nd. Then a memo in the middle of February that says that we are trying to recover this, that we had to get emergency funding, and that the costs are fairly staggering. It's kind of hard for me to imagine that Mayor Barrett knew nothing about it. So I think one of the questions would be, when did the mayor know? What did he know? What did Chief Flynn ever tell the mayor? But apparently he doesn't want to address those questions.
Obviously not. He said he just recently learned about it, but you have memos from January and February, so I think Mayor Barrett was a little bit too busy with the trolley issue to pay attention to what was going on in the police department, but clearly they brought it to individuals' attention that they needed additional funding to pay for the recovery and the additional backup for their system.
Okay, Colin Roth.
Yeah, maybe they can consult Hillary Clinton on this catastrophic hard drive failure, but I think I'm very interested in the who knew what when aspect, and I find it really interesting that Chief Flynn would say this is not a secret. Now, some may have known that, but us in the public, we didn't know anything about it.
And clearly members of the Common Council didn't know either.
Yeah,
So.
I think it's a huge stretch to go after Tom Barrett on this. The reality is, from what we've been told, he didn't get a memo on it, and when he was told about it, the fixes were already starting to be implemented. There had already been money appropriated, so he didn't panic and freak out. I think this is a case where the press or the media kind of found out about this story after the fact, and they're acting as if it just happened. I think the part that bothers me the most, though, is the point you made about that it's only 7 cases so far, but there could be more. And also, you may remember that the Milwaukee Police Department website was hacked into in December. So to me, I think that there needs to be an IT audit ordered by the police commissioner to make sure that his IT department is functioning correctly.
Well, we also, I mean, some of the cases that were affected by this, you know, the shooting death of that young little boy named Bill Tao, the person involved in that, who's been charged with murder, his interview has now disappeared, has now been lost. So it's not like we're talking about a group of misdemeanors here. But this also raises the question that if you have a catastrophic failure that wipes out all of this evidence for, you know, and this happens in January, and we don't hear about it, what else do we not know about? This is one of the top issues in this community. We are having this explosion in violent crime, this big debate over police resources and what is going on, why are there so many guns on the street? And if we do not know stuff like this, if the mayor does not know what's going on in his police department, what else is going on that we don't know? I think these are interesting. What was your reaction as a former legislator, by the way, to Chief Flynn, who was invited to testify this coming week before the legislature about what happened, saying that he's not going to come and he's not going to allow any members of his department to come?
It's very disappointing. You would think that he would want to get to the bottom of this as well and find out exactly why this happened, but it's very disappointing, and it really says something about how he respects the legislature.
You're the Dan Adams?
I think he should just go. I think the Common Council is the proper forum for this investigation, but I think he should just go.
Well, again, if he's got a good explanation, you give the good explanation, don't you?
Yeah, I would think so, and it should be a no-brainer.
Okay, you may not want to hear it, but we will tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Dan Adams, you're first.
To U.S. Senate Democrats and their would-be colleague, Senator Russ Feingold, support President Obama's TPP trade bill. International trade is a good thing. Embrace the bill and help American businesses sell more beyond our own borders.
Michelle Litchens.
Well, this week we saw the Speaker of Missouri resign after sex messaging with an intern became public. My advice to every elected official: don't sex text anyone. It never turns out well.
Linda Bruin.
A Germantown woman was recently on a Southwest flight when she received a suicidal text message from her husband. She begged the flight crew to let her call him or have the pilot make an emergency call, but her pleas were refused. When the plane landed, her husband was dead. Southwest has offered to refund her ticket. My advice: sue the airline big time.
Colin Roth.
My unsolicited advice is for Congressman Glenn Grothman, who attacked his primary opponent, Joe Lieben, for holding a fundraiser with a powerful D.C. couple during the primary last year. Don't turn around and hold a fundraiser with that same couple just 5 months into your first term. What are you thinking?
Well, my unsolicited advice is to Chief Ed Flynn. Now, you say you need the legislature's help to fight violent crime, right? But then when they invite you to testify, you flip them off, metaphorically speaking. It's a bad idea. Next time, show some class, answer their questions. They were elected, you weren't. Next on Sunday Insight, the proposal to create a turnaround school district for failing schools in Milwaukee. An ambitious plan to fix some of Milwaukee's failing schools. Two local legislators, Representative Dale Koinga and Senator Alberta Darling, want to create a so-called turnaround district that would have some of the city's 55 failing schools run by a commissioner appointed by the county executive rather than the Milwaukee School Board. The president of the teachers union denounced the plan as racist because he said the authors were white and most students were black and brown. Democrats also unanimously opposed the idea of messing with the status quo. Your reaction to the proposal, is it going anywhere, Colin Roth?
Well, we'll see if it goes somewhere, but here's the good about it. The good is it's taking on the status quo, that there's people who are actually outraged about the 55 failing schools in the Milwaukee Public School District, and they say we want to come up and do something different. What's kind of iffy about this proposal is that there's very little local buy-in or local leadership on the issue, that it's a GOP plan from Madison that is going to be invested heavily in a Milwaukee Democrat, Chris Abley. I'm not sure about this.
How did they end up with Abley? Why Abley? Where does the county executive come into this?
Well, who else?
Well, but he's the last man standing. You're right. Your thoughts on this proposal?
Well, the natural fit would be the mayor's office. These are city schools in the city. The county executive office it's a little awkward.
But Tom Barrett doesn't want to be involved in this.
Well, evidently. You know, if you ever want to have statistics make you cry, take a look at MPS achievement statistics, reading proficiency in some of these schools. And one school, it's basically zero. None of the kids can read.
So name one of your fellow Democrats in Milwaukee who wants to do something about that.
None in the legislative delegation. They sent a letter out that's basically said no, and they're falling in line behind the teachers union, which I think is unfortunate. Now, I am looking at the details of the bill. I don't know if I support it completely, but I'm glad that they are doing something.
You know, what I found really interesting is MPS on their website, and they talk about how awful this is. They're inspiring people to do something, like contact the legislator about it. They're not saying anything about what do we do about these kids who can't read at these schools.
Linda Brun.
You know, I don't know whether this is a really great idea, and frankly, I think if you're going to move forward with it, you should take a couple schools and do a test case before you turn over all 55 potentially. In fact, the legislation is real slim on real slim on details. But the bottom line is, I think the biggest positive I see out of it is that since we've had these failing schools for years now, and the public turned down and the leaders at B turned down Barrett's attempt to take over the school system back in 2009, if this doesn't kick the Milwaukee Public School Board in their proverbial butts and get them to take some drastic action, I don't know what will, because the threat of Republicans from outstate Wisconsin taking over a city of Milwaukee schools, that's got to be horrifying to them.
It so dramatically highlights the lack of outrage about this particular issue. I mean, the fact that liberals are so much more outraged about this. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. What is it you don't get? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
Well, I don't get how Wisconsin Republicans used free market arguments to justify the right to work law, but now are pushing a bill, AB 91, to allow employers to enter highly anti-competitive contracts that block the free flow of labor. Hypocritical.
Michelle Litchens.
Charlie, what I don't get is if Nick Kovac really wanted to reduce unemployment and improve the lives of his constituents in Milwaukee, why would he want to encourage bad behavior by lowering the fine for possessing marijuana?
Linda Bruin.
Well, what I don't get is a conservative radio host and Fox News contributor who said that the sexual orientation of Amtrak engineer Brandon Bastian was a factor in Tuesday's train derailment that killed 8 people and injured hundreds more. Newsflash. The train derailed because it was going 106 miles per hour, not because the engineer was gay.
Colin Roth.
Well, on a similar note, what I don't get is why every single natural or human disaster must become a political football. Before the bodies were even collected in Philadelphia from last week's Amtrak crash, pundits and politicians were already hurling accusations about Amtrak funding and infrastructure spending. Let's have some decency.
Well, what I don't get, as I mentioned before, is why liberals in Milwaukee are more outraged about the plan to fix failing schools than they are about the fact that there are 55 failing schools in this city. Now, next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first.
My winner is Milwaukee 911 operator Alyssa Marquez, who was given the Meritorious Service Award for her handling of a multiple stabbing call in January. Through her skilled handling of the call, Ms. Marquez saved the lives of several gravely injured victims. My losers, Chicagoans. The Moody's bond rating agency downgraded the city's debt to junk bond status. The downgrade came after the Illinois Supreme Court tossed a law aimed at cutting costs in 4 state government worker pension funds. This won't end up well.
Michelle Litchens.
My losers are the people who say the poor buy chips and soda for dinner because they live in so-called food deserts. The New York Times reported this week that even when government builds grocery stores filled with fresh fruits and vegetables in food deserts, people didn't change their food habits. My winner is the State Assembly. who voted this week to require people spend 2/3 of their food stamp money on healthy foods. More than 13% of Wisconsin's Medicaid dollars are spent on obesity issues. That's $2.9 billion that could be going to schools or cut taxes.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my winner is Dane County DA Ozan. His decision not to charge Officer Kenny was made on the facts, not politics, race, or emotion. In his news conference, Ozan was compassionate and professional. There was no showboating for the national media. Instead, he offered condolences, acknowledged the criminal justice system's failings, and then methodically laid out the reasons why charges weren't warranted. My loser is Ron Johnson. Russ Feingold's announcement that he's running puts Johnson's re-election in serious jeopardy. Feingold has a huge lead over Johnson in the polls. Plus, it's been 35 years since a Wisconsin Republican has won a contested Senate seat in a presidential election year.
Colin Roth.
My winner this week is also Dane County District Attorney Ismail Ozan. While I agree with him on just about nothing, he made the right and appropriate call in not pressing charges against Madison police officer Matt Kenny in the face of overwhelming pressure and media scrutiny. My losers are the teachers' unions. You spent more energy and expressed more outrage this week at a bold new plan for education reform in Milwaukee than you ever had for the 55 failing schools in Milwaukee. Once again, it wasn't about the kids at all.
Well, my winner, State Representative Dale Koinga and Senator Alberta Darling, for showing some genuine leadership on the issue of failing schools here. That showed guts and principle. My loser, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, who is refusing to allow a hearing or a floor vote on proposals to repeal the wasteful, antiquated prevailing wage law. That shows neither guts nor principle. Thanks for joining us. Join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ. Have a great week.